On the early morning of August 19, 2023, Nevada Highway Patrol Officer Mark Ellison began his overnight shift near Tonopah, a sleepy desert town surrounded by nothing but open road and shadows. The town itself holds no fame, no mystery. Just dry winds, rusted signs, and long stretches of silence that seem to swallow sound itself in the vast emptiness of the Nevada high desert. Tonopah sits at the intersection of nowhere and forgotten, a place where the interstate carries travelers between Las Vegas and Reno without most of them ever bothering to slow down. The town peaked during the silver mining boom of the early 1900s, when fortune seekers flooded the harsh landscape in search of wealth buried in the unforgiving earth. Now it serves mainly as a refueling stop for long-haul truckers and the occasional tourist brave enough to venture into the authentic American West that exists far from the neon lights and manufactured excitement of the big cities. Officer Mark Ellison had been patrolling these desolate highways for 7 years, long enough to know every curve, every landmark, every abandoned building that dotted the landscape like tombstones marking the graves of forgotten dreams. At 34, he was a veteran of the desert beat, someone who understood the unique challenges of policing an area where backup might be an hour away and cell phone towers were spread so far apart that communication could be spotty at the best of times. Mark had chosen this assignment specifically because he appreciated the solitude and the straightforward nature of highway patrol work. No complex investigations, no domestic disputes, no gang violence, just traffic enforcement, accident response, and the occasional assistance to stranded motorists whose vehicles had succumbed to the harsh desert conditions. It was honest work that allowed him to serve his community while maintaining the kind of peaceful routine that had become increasingly rare in modern law enforcement. The shift had started like any other. Mark completed his pre-duty inspection of his patrol cruiser, checked his equipment, and reviewed the overnight briefing that rarely contained anything more exciting than weather advisories and construction updates. The August night was typical for the high desert, scorching during the day, surprisingly cool once the sun disappeared behind the distant mountains. A light wind carried the scent of sagebrush and dust, the eternal perfume of Nevada's backcountry. At precisely 3:17 a.m., during a routine sweep on Route 6, a stretch of two-lane blacktop that connected Tonopah to the agricultural communities to the east, Mark's radio transmission suddenly cut out mid-sentence. He had been checking in with dispatch, following standard protocol for officers patrolling alone in remote areas, when his voice simply stopped in the middle of reporting his location and status. Dispatcher Sarah Martinez had been working the overnight shift for 12 years and had heard every kind of communication problem imaginable. Dead batteries, equipment malfunctions, interference from atmospheric conditions, she'd dealt with them all. But this was different. Mark's voice didn't fade or distort or get overwhelmed by static. It just stopped, as if someone had flipped a switch and severed the connection instantaneously. Dispatch called back immediately. No answer. They tried again. Still nothing. Sarah felt the first flutter of concern in her chest as she attempted to raise Mark on different frequencies, using backup channels and emergency protocols designed specifically for situations where primary communication had been compromised. His cruiser's GPS signal, a system that had never failed in the 5 years since the department had installed the tracking technology, vanished completely from the monitoring system. Not moving erratically, not showing position errors, just gone. The computer screen that normally displayed a real-time map of all patrol units in the field showed a blank space where Mark's identifier should have been, as if his vehicle had been erased from existence. The disappearance lasted for exactly 6 minutes and 43 seconds. Sarah watched the digital clock on her console, counting each second as it passed, while she coordinated with neighboring agencies and prepared to dispatch backup units to Mark's last known location. She was reaching for the phone to wake up the shift commander when Mark's signal suddenly reappeared on the tracking system. Then, just as abruptly as he had vanished from the airways, he checked back in like nothing had happened. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7, checking status." Mark's voice came through the radio speakers with crystal clarity, sounding completely normal and relaxed, as if the previous 6 minutes of radio silence had never occurred. Sarah stared at her console in confusion, momentarily unsure how to respond. "Unit 7, where have you been?" We've been trying to raise you for almost 7 minutes. Are you experiencing equipment problems? Mark sounded genuinely puzzled by her concern. What do you mean? I've been driving. Everything's fine. Just continuing my patrol on Route 6 eastbound. All systems normal. But it wasn't normal, and Sarah knew it. In her 12 years behind the dispatch console, she'd never seen anything like the complete disappearance of a patrol unit's electronic signature. Equipment could malfunction, but not every system simultaneously. GPS satellites didn't just stop tracking vehicles for no reason. Radio communications didn't cut out so cleanly and then resume without explanation. She filed an incident report, but with no obvious emergency and Mark insisting that nothing unusual had occurred, there was little more she could do during the overnight shift. The real investigation would have to wait for the day shift supervisors and the technical staff who maintained the department's communication and tracking systems. When IT staff arrived at the station later that morning to investigate the communication blackout, they discovered something that sent chills through everyone who viewed it. The department had recently installed an automated body cam system in all patrol vehicles, cameras that recorded continuously and uploaded footage to secure cloud storage every hour as a backup measure and quality assurance tool. The footage showed Mark driving as usual along the familiar stretch of Route 6, his hands relaxed on the steering wheel, his posture indicating the kind of casual alertness that experienced patrol officers develop after years of overnight shifts. The timestamp on the recording showed 3:16 a.m., just 60 seconds before the communication blackout began. Then, without any apparent cause or trigger, his cruiser suddenly stops in the middle of an empty desert highway. Not a gradual deceleration, not a response to road conditions or traffic, the vehicle simply ceased moving forward as if every mechanical system had simultaneously decided to shut down. Mark's demeanor changed instantly. His hands tightened on the steering wheel with enough force that his knuckles turned white in the dashboard lighting. His posture stiffened, his breathing became shallow and rapid, and his eyes widened as he stared straight ahead into the darkness beyond his headlight beams. The headlights themselves began to behave strangely, their normal white illumination flickering and dimming as if the electrical system was struggling to maintain power. Then, in the distance ahead of the stopped patrol car, an unnatural fog began to form, not the wispy, translucent mist that occasionally rises from the desert floor on cool nights, but a dense, rolling wall of vapor that seemed to glow with its own internal light. Within the fog, pulsing lights began to form, geometric patterns that shifted between blue, green, and a sickly amber that hurt to look at directly. The lights moved with purpose and intelligence, arranging themselves in configurations that suggested some kind of communication or scanning process. They were low to the ground, perhaps 3 or 4 feet above the asphalt, and they cast shadows that moved independently of their sources. The audio pickup from Mark's bodycam captured his breathing becoming increasingly labored, punctuated by small gasps and whispered words that the reviewing technicians couldn't quite make out. His vital signs monitor, another recent addition to the patrol equipment, showed his heart rate climbing from a normal resting rate of 72 beats per minute to over 140 in the span of less than 60 seconds. Then, in a moment that would haunt everyone who viewed the footage, a figure appeared at the edge of the fog bank. Tall, impossibly thin, with elongated limbs that seemed to stretch beyond normal human proportions. The figure stood just beyond the reach of the patrol car's headlights, existing in a space between visibility and shadow that made it difficult to discern specific details. No clear face could be seen, no eyes or mouth or any recognizable human features. Just a silhouette that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, a shape that somehow conveyed intelligence and intent without revealing any of the characteristics that humans instinctively use to read body language and emotion. Mark never stepped out of the vehicle. In fact, he appeared to be frozen in place, his grip on the steering wheel never loosening, his gaze never wavering from the scene unfolding in front of him. And yet, in the faint audio captured by the bodycam sensitive microphones, a voice could be heard whispering, speaking in a distorted, echoing language that didn't match any known dialect or linguistic pattern in the databases that the department's consultants checked. The voice was layered, as if multiple speakers were talking simultaneously but not quite in unison, creating a harmonic effect that was both hypnotic and deeply unsettling. The cadence was rhythmic but irregular, with pauses and inflections that suggested meaning beyond the comprehension of human listeners. Most disturbing of all, the voice didn't seem to be speaking to Mark from an external source. It was speaking through him. Mark's lips moved slightly, as if he were unconsciously mouthing words in response to some internal conversation. His vital signs showed patterns consistent with deep meditation or trance states, even as his physical appearance suggested extreme stress and fear. Whatever was happening to him operated on multiple levels of consciousness simultaneously. His body was terrified, but some deeper part of his mind was engaged in communication that transcended normal sensory experience. The exchange, if it could be called that, continued for approximately 4 minutes, during which time the lights in the fog grew brighter and more active, pulsing in patterns that seemed to correspond to the rhythm of the mysterious voice. The figure at the edge of visibility remained motionless, but additional shapes began to appear deeper within the fog bank, suggesting that Mark was not dealing with a single entity but rather some kind of organized presence. Then came a sharp burst of static that overloaded the audio recording equipment, followed by a flash of light so intense that it completely whited out the video feed. The brightness was not gradual or flickering like conventional illumination, it was instantaneous and absolute, as if someone had detonated a photographer's flash the size of a building just in front of the patrol car. When the light faded and the video cleared, the fog was gone. The mysterious lights had vanished. The elongated figure had disappeared as if it had never existed. Mark sat alone in his patrol car in the middle of an empty highway, looking confused and disoriented but physically unharmed. The video cut abruptly at that point, and when recording resumed several seconds later, Mark was already back in motion, continuing his patrol as if nothing unusual had occurred. His vital signs had returned to normal, his posture was relaxed, and his radio communication with dispatch resumed in the calm, professional tone that characterized his usual interactions. When his cruiser reappeared on the GPS tracking system, it was parked on the shoulder of Route 6 exactly where it had vanished 7 minutes earlier. No signs of damage to the vehicle. No evidence of mechanical problems. No residual traces of the supernatural fog or the mysterious lights that had surrounded him during those lost minutes. Mark underwent a standard post-incident medical evaluation and psychological assessment, both of which showed no abnormalities or signs of impairment. He had no memory of the 6 minutes and 43 seconds during which he had disappeared from all electronic monitoring systems. As far as he was concerned, he had experienced a brief equipment malfunction and had pulled over to check his systems before resuming patrol. But those who worked closely with Mark noticed changes in the weeks that followed the incident. Subtle alterations in his behavior and demeanor that suggested the encounter had affected him on levels beyond his conscious awareness. Fellow officers reported him staring blankly into the desert during breaks, his gaze focused on distant points on the horizon as if he were watching for something that only he could perceive. He began flinching at radio feedback and electronic interference, showing startled responses to sounds that had never bothered him before. Most unsettling of all, other officers occasionally heard him mumbling words in what sounded like the same strange language that had been captured on his body cam audio, words that he claimed not to remember speaking. The department's official response was swift and predictable. The incident was classified as an equipment malfunction, attributed to some combination of atmospheric interference, solar radiation, and the kind of technical glitches that occasionally affect electronic systems in remote areas. Mark received a commendation for his professional handling of a potentially dangerous situation, and the case was filed away in the archives as a minor anomaly in an otherwise routine patrol shift. But within the precinct, where officers shared the kinds of stories and experiences that never make it into official reports, the incident took on a life of its own. Someone, nobody remembers who first used the term, began referring to it as the 317 incident, named for the exact time when Mark's radio went silent and his world changed forever. The name stuck, and with it came an unspoken understanding among the officers who patrolled the desert highways around Tonopah. They developed informal protocols and superstitions designed to avoid repeating Mark's experience. Some officers requested route changes that would keep them away from that particular stretch of Route 6 during the early morning hours. Others began carrying personal recording devices as backup to their official equipment, hoping to capture evidence that their superiors couldn't dismiss or classify. And to this day, more than a year after the incident, veteran officers pass along a warning to rookies assigned to the desert patrol routes. It's delivered casually, almost as a joke, but with an undercurrent of genuine concern that suggests the humor is a defense mechanism against something too frightening to acknowledge directly. They say if you're driving Route 6 past Tonopah around that time, around 3:17 in the morning when the desert is at its darkest and most isolated, don't stop unless you absolutely have to. Don't investigate unusual lights or unexplained fog banks, no matter how curious you might be. And whatever you hear in the static between radio transmissions, whatever voices seem to whisper just below the threshold of conscious perception, don't answer. Don't engage. Don't give them a reason to remember your name.